Classmates, it's time for class. Today we are going to learn about the radio component. Radio is a radio button component. It is one of the basic components of graphical interfaces, commonly used in business scenarios where only one option can be selected in a form, such as when users choose their gender during registration. The radio component is similar to the checkbox component. It also needs to be wrapped in a group, which is the radio group component. The radio group component consists of multiple radio buttons inside. Usually, multiple radio buttons are wrapped in a single radio group component to achieve the selection of a single radio button. In this lesson, we will learn about the properties and usage of the radio component together. First, let's look at the properties of the radio group component. It has only one property called change, which is an event handler, similar to the checkbox group component. When the options in the radio group component change, whether being selected or deselect, it triggers the change event. The value comes from event detail value. The difference from the checkbox group is that there is only one selected radio item value inside. Since the radio component is for single selection, it doesn't need an array to store the selected value. Now, let's look at the properties of the radio component. The first property of the radio is value, which is the identifier of the radio. When a radio is selected, which value does the change event of the radio group carry? It carries the value of the radio. Please note that this value is the internal identifier of the radio. The radio should also have a descriptive text displayed on the interface. Check indicates whether the current radio item is selected. Disabled indicates whether the current radio item is disabled. Color indicates the color of the radio. These attributes are basically similar to those of the checkbox component. Let's look at an example. This is the most basic usage of the radio. It can be checked, but this approach is generally not recommended, because without wrapping the radio tags with radio group, you cannot retrieve the selected value, nor can it be used in practical business scenarios. Since radio buttons often appear as a group, such as for gender selection, having only one answer for a single choice question would be meaningless. Therefore, radio buttons must be grouped using radio group. This radio group contains 3 radios: basketball, football, tennis. The radios inside the radio group are mutually exclusive, allowing only one selection. When basketball is chosen, the others will be deselect. Here, there is an attribute called value, representing the identifier of the radio. This identifier value should be unique. The basketball represents the descriptive text displayed after the radio. It is the visible label text on the interface. The actual internal identifier used is value, such as BB. The returned value after selecting basketball is BB. For football, the returned value is FB. There is also a disabled attribute, indicating whether the radio is disabled. Let's take a look. If disabled is set to true, it means the radio is disabled. Simply adding disabled indicates the current radio is disabled. Now, can basketball and football be selected? No, they cannot be selected. Only tennis can be selected, because the former two are disabled. Neither basketball nor football can be selected, so only tennis can be chosen. The checked attribute indicates whether the current item is selected. It controls whether the radio button is initially selected. When an option has checked, it is selected. Currently, basketball is initially selected. Football and tennis are not. Of course, using the checked attribute set to true is also valid. Now, football is initially selected. When you check basketball or tennis, the selected item will switch accordingly. This is the purpose of the checked attribute. Unlike checkbox components, radio buttons cannot be multi-selected. So, at the code level, each group can only have one radio with checked set to true. Otherwise, an error may occur. Let's look at the color attribute. It controls the color of the check mark inside the radio button. This attribute is similar to the color attribute of checkbox components. Of course, there are different ways to represent this color. Next, let's look at the change event of the radio group. Through handling this change event, you can obtain the value of the selected item. In this case, we have basketball, football, and tennis. The value of the radio item representing basketball is basketball. For football it's football, and for tennis it's tennis. Now, through the handle change method, we can obtain the selected value. First, print out the detail value from the console. Then, store the value obtained here in the value ball variable. Finally, where will it be displayed? The value ball variable is bound here. Let's take a look at selecting the football radio item. It shows football. For basketball, it shows basketball. Please note that only one value will be retrieved here, because it is a single selection. As you can see, basketball is displayed again. The handle change method can retrieve the value of the selected item in this group of radio buttons. As there is only one selected value, the value of the selected item in this group of radio buttons is stored in the value ball variable. Lastly, let's look at another example. In this case, there is also a radio group component, and the value is obtained through the radio change method. The radio items here are rendered by looping through an array. This array includes the countries United States, China, Brazil, and Japan. The object with the name United States has a value of USA. China is CHN. Brazil is BRA. Japan is JPN. By default, the object with the name China has its checked attribute set to true. Let's take a look. Using V for equals item in items, where items is the array. Its value attribute is set to item, value, and item name is the displayed label text on the page. Check it indicates which option is initially selected. With a value of item checked, currently, only the option with the name China is selected by default. Let's take a look. Do you understand? You can also select other options. After selecting one, what method will be executed? The radio change method. In the radio change method, first, output the value of the selected item to the console. Then, set this value to a detail value. Save this selected value to the value variable. And display it. There is a submit button. When clicked, it will execute the submit method. The submit method displays this value in a pop-up. Now, the selected option is China. Then Brazil is selected, followed by Japan. And finally, the United States is selected. This concludes the example. In this lesson, we learned about some of the uses of the built-in radio component in UniApp. The main included attributes are that value attribute, disabled attribute, checked attribute, etc. It's especially important to note how that change event provided by the radio group is used. Similar to the checkbox component, radio is also a commonly used component in graphical interfaces. Its usage is almost identical to the checkbox component, but the way values are retrieved differs. For checkboxes, the values are an array of all selected items, while for radio components, the value retrieved is that of the uniquely selected item. The key distinction lies here. That's all for this lesson. Thank you, everyone.